I assume there's some level of treatment there in Mexico?
No, you'd be surprised. So in that 1990 treaty minute the two countries signed, they agreed to several things. One was the installation of a river diversion system, which is called PBCLA, the acronym for the pump station. It can capture and divert now up to 35 million gallons of runoff per day, which right now is largely sewage, and it pumps it to the coast where it's discharged untreated onto the coast. Up until very recently, that pump station couldn't operate because between that pump station and the coast is another pump station and a pipeline that were compromised 2 years ago. Those have finally been restored to service, and PBCLA can operate at least partially. The treatment plant itself takes 25 million gallons of flow a day from the collection system, not from the river. A common misunderstanding is that the treatment plant treats the river. It does not. The U.S. side treatment plant in San Ysidro only treats sewage from Tijuana. But the river flows, when they're diverted to the coast, they're not treated. They're discharged on the shoreline. All of the local agencies and the regional board all agreed that one of the outcomes we wanted to see from the litigation we filed was a river diversion system that brought the wastewater flows into the U.S. from the river, treated them, and then discharged them together with the treated wastewater offshore as a superior alternative to discharging untreated wastewater and industrial releases right on the shoreline where it flows north on the onshore current back into the U.S.
In terms of the solutions that are currently planned to increase the size of this plant on the border side, is that going to have a big impact on this situation?
Yes, it will. And I think it's fair to mention right now, to reference a question you asked a moment ago, there are 3 wastewater treatment plants in Tijuana itself. There's La Marita and Arturo Herrera, which are modern treatment plants, but they only treat about 12 to 15 million gallons of wastewater per day. And because that wastewater right now has no use, it's discharged to the river, treated, but it quickly becomes polluted as soon as it reaches the river. And at San Antonio de los Buenos, they are expanding and building a new treatment plant there, which will treat 18 million gallons of wastewater to secondary, but discharge it on the shoreline. But that doesn't provide for all of Tijuana's sewering needs. There's a large volume of wastewater which can't be accommodated at those 3 treatment plants or at the current international wastewater treatment plant due to its size limitations. So the idea to expand that, the proposal to expand that treatment plant from 25 million gallons per day to 50 million gallons per day is a huge step in the right direction. It captures more of Tijuana's wastewater capacity that needs to be treated. It treats it to a high standard when the treatment plant's fully operational and compliance to at least secondary. That water could be made available for return to Mexico if they wish, for domestic reuse, like we're doing in San Diego with the Pure Water Project. That's one of the options that was studied. And otherwise, it would result in it being discharged 3.5 miles offshore at a secondary treated level, better, in fact, than what's being treated at Point Loma right now. Tijuana is in a much more dire water situation in terms of supply than San Diego. They're currently having to buy water from San Diego at a rather high price. They need all the water they can get, being at the end of the Colorado River and having to share that water with farmers in Mexicali. So there's some real long-term climate change benefits from being able to recycle and reuse this wastewater.
You're going to see massive amount of construction. So this is really the start of that.
Dr. Maria-Elena Giner is the commissioner with the International Boundary and Water Commission, IBWC. Her agency is tasked with addressing the sewage crisis on the U.S. side. You know, we are very concerned about Tijuana River. There has been beach closures in San Diego, and this has been a big problem.
Right.
In terms of you guys are investing in plants here. There's a plant here that we actually visited.
Right.
And you're trying to double the capacity
Correct.
of this plant. How does that impact this picture?
So right now, the way the system works is about most of our defensive measures are all in Mexico, where river water is taken from the river, pumped over multiple canyons to the coast. And that's very expensive, and it's an old system, and we're subject to Mexico's maintenance. Mexico has less resources than the United States. So doubling the size of our plant will allow reduction of that pump to their Mexican coast. It will all start to flow by gravity to our plant. So it gives us more control on the defensive measures on the U.S. side. That doesn't mean that that will not require them to pump water from the river, but it will start to reduce the flow.
And what does the picture look like down the line for the residents that are in this community
Right.
after these investments? Because there's a lot of investments coming in.
Right. So the cost of expanding and rehabilitating our plant is on the order of $600 million. Thus far, we've secured $400 million because of the support and advocacy that we have gotten from the residents, because of the support and that we've gotten from members of Congress, as well as the administration to support this advancement of funding for this cause. Before that, this agency only received for the entire border, an average of $32 million in construction for the entire border. And we manage 500 miles of levees, 2 international dams, 5 diversion dams, 2 ports of entry, and 2 wastewater treatment plants, because we have one here and we have one in Nogales. It doesn't take rocket science to say why only 32 million, right? Well, at that time when I started here at the IBWC, they had been giving us that on average, but we had almost $200 million of unobligated funds. So Congress is not going to give you more money until you start spending the money you have. So the first thing we did was we obligated just about all of that money. All of those projects are out for construction, and Congress saw, okay, we can give you more money and we will put it to good use. And that's why this project was prioritized as part of that, right? So now we're in a position where Congress does want to give us more money to address this issue, and that will be really useful because we want to get to 600 million. Right now we have 400 million. The FY25 budget has an additional 100 million for this project, so that will be very useful. So as we go through our annual funding appropriation, that will hopefully fill the gap. Now, is this all the money we need? No. We are just playing catch up right now. We are catching up to a decade worth of lack of investment in this wastewater treatment plant. Between 2010 and 2020, only $4 million was invested in this plant. And this is not an old plant. It was built in 1997. That combined with the lack of investment in Mexico really got us to where we're at now. So in August of 2022, we signed an agreement with Mexico called a MINIT. That is a contractually international agreement. It's a tool that the IBWC uses to make agreements with Mexico. And we agreed that we would double the size of our plant, and they would invest $144 million in infrastructure for 15 projects. So far, Mexico has secured about 40% of their funding. We are barely in year 2.5 of this. It's a 5-year agreement. So they're pretty good in terms of securing funding. In Mexico, there's no carryover from year to year. So their projects are sized for 1 year's worth of funding. So we're doing really well with regards to that. It would not be helpful for them to have all the funding at this point because they would not be able to implement it. This combination of funding in Mexico plus the expansion of the plant is envisioned to reduce untreated wastewater in Tijuana by 90%. Okay, so there's always going to be fugitive flows, and we will continue monitoring that. But this is where we're going to get right now. What's going to be needed in the future? This momentum that we have cannot drop off. It needs to continue moving forward. Otherwise, we will start slipping back into deferred maintenance and then getting back into the situation where we have these unacceptable flows in the river.
How long do you think it will take for this project to get to the level where the community would feel it, like the smell is gone?
Right. Reducing the risk is going to take about 3 to 5 years, but I think there's going to be incremental improvements as we go along, as Mexico builds their infrastructure and we start to slowly ramp up our infrastructure. Because although the plant is envisioned to be doubled in capacity, rehabilitated, there's about $150 million worth of just rehabilitation needs. So doing that while operating the plant is a very complex piece of the construction, right? So we're rehabilitating the plant while it's operating, and we're doubling the capacity. You know, a typical project of that size will be 5 to 7 years. Because of the contractual arrangements that we have one contractor that's going to do the construction and the design. It's called a progressive design build. We are envisioning that they're going to be able to reduce the schedule. We just kicked that off. We don't have a firm schedule yet, but we should be having one by the spring of 2025.
Now, in terms of the beaches in southern part of San Diego, do you think after you guys do all these projects, will it get to a point where it will be completely like the rest of San Diego?
Absolutely. But it has to continue. Maintenance has to continue. Maintenance on our plant and maintenance in Mexico. Investment in our plant and investment in Mexico. The levels of funding that were coming to this region for the plant cannot be at the levels that were in the past. Only $4 million in this plant, right? There's got to be a consistent level of funding that goes into this plant. We don't have those numbers yet. We will be having those numbers by March of 2025, but we should be investing on a regular basis into this plant. In the last 2 years, we've invested $31 million in the plant. In 10 years, it was $4 million, right? So that gives you an idea of the increase of the magnitude of the funding that needs to come to this plant so that we can be able to maintain it. The other thing is that the International Boundary and Water Commission, we have a duplicate agency in Mexico, right? We have to continue those discussions with Mexico and creating metrics where we can see how much of their wastewater they're treating, how they're maintaining their system, because if we don't, and we don't monitor that on a year-to-year basis, it will start to slip. What is the advantage that brings? If we see that they're starting to slip in their investment, then we can have advocates here, the U.S. federal government speak to the Mexican federal government about bringing more investment to the region.
And when they are not investing, there could be more flow of sewage into the river, right?
Correct. They'll start to have collapsed sewer lines. Mostly that is the big issue, is collapsed sewer lines. They also have 2 other wastewater treatment plants. So maintenance in those plants are really important. And obviously maintaining the brand new plant that they're building is going to be really important, because that's how this all started. In 2017, that plant on the coast stopped treating wastewater, and then the wastewater started flowing north, which started to initially close the beaches during certain periods of time. Now, because of the flow in the river, the beaches have been closed all year. And that's what we want to get to, is having our beaches open during non-rainy season. Yeah. Correct.
Do you have any other thoughts for our audience?
Yes, I think that what I want people to walk away with is that there's a lot of heart that's going in from people here at IBWC to get this resolved. We don't want communities to be negatively impacted. It is completely unacceptable that they don't have access to a public amenity like a beach. It's completely unacceptable that they don't feel comfortable because of air quality concerns. We are catching up, and I ask for the patience, but we are going to be identifying all the potential opportunities to reduce timelines. But after we've caught up, we need to move from a reactive mode to a proactive mode. And the IBWC is working on 3 foundational studies so that we can do that. One is we've completed a manpower study that has demonstrated that the agency needs about 20% more staff to maintain the infrastructure that we have. The second thing that we've done is we've created an asset management area that has inventoried all of the components of our wastewater treatment plants, of our gauging stations, of our vehicles, and we'll be setting up a computerized maintenance system that's going to tell us how much money this agency needs to properly maintain this infrastructure. This asset management is going to take 3 to 5 years, because it's got to include our dams, it's got to include our ports of entry, it's got to include our levees. But our first focus is our wastewater systems, which are 2 of them, the one here and the one in Nogales. And our third foundational study that we're doing is our capital plan, a capital plan that looks out 20 to 30 years to identify those needs. So this is going to be all the information that community is going to need to know. So they need to continue advocating that this region receive the adequate funding It needs to maintain what we're doing right now. This cannot stop with just this major focus now. If it does, we will start slipping back and having this issue again.